Welcome back to Azure Terraformer. Today we're going to continue to explore the OpenAI service, but today we're going to do it with none other than Bicep. So it's going to be a crazy ride. Let's get started. I decided to look into Bicep and teach myself a little Bicep. It's a cool name because there's Azure Arm, and what do arms have but biceps? So it's a little clever joke there. But looking at the Bicep documentation, it pleasantly looks much better than ARM, I have to admit. And there's a lot of things that look very, very similar to Terraform. There are resource blocks, there are modules, there are outputs, there are variables, it looks like, maybe, or params, like maybe if a variable is more of like a local and param is more of like the actual input variable. Some new things, there is a target scope. So unlike in Terraform, where you can provision things that are at a subscription level alongside things that are at a resource group level, Bicep appears to have kind of this targeted scope. So you have to specify, hey, what I'm about to provision, I'm going to provision at the subscription level. Not sure why it needs to do that. Seems like the resource should know how to do that, but that's the way it is. That could make things a little bit tricky, or at least different from a code structuring standpoint. But these are like, by the way, this is like the first time really I've looked at Bicep. So you're getting somebody who's used Terraform for several years now, maybe 8, I don't know, 8 years, and just kind of reacting to Bicep. I've not used Bicep. I've been pretty much doing Terraform non-stop since I started, which has been great. And looking at this after working with the Azure API, AZ API provider, this looks a lot like the AZ API provider, which for Terraform, which I did a video about previously on my channel, except for some of these subtle syntax deviations from HCL. Other than that, just looking at module, like the structure of this, up until we get to here, where the source of the module appears to be embedded in the module block header, as opposed to a source meta argument attached to the module, like within the module block. This looks pretty much like a module. Now it does appear like that there's a name and a params, which is a little bit different. In Terraform, you would not have to pass input parameters or input variables in a special params block. You would just attach them to the module. So there's some additional syntactic sugar here. Honestly, I don't even know what this name really means. Is this like a fixed input variable that's on every module that you have to specify a name for the module? I have no idea. It makes no sense to me. Many Azure resources have a name, and many of them have a location. And actually things get a little bit crazy in here. Like we have skew and we have kind and properties, and this is very different from Terraform, where Terraform has a relatively flat structure. There's no properties blob, like there is in ARM, where properties is essentially like an attribute bag. And then there's top level attributes like skew and kind within the schema of a resource. Terraform basically, when you write a resource, you define all of those things as top level attributes. Terraform also does not make use of the API version that's built into the version of the provider that Terraform's using, and Terraform does not use the actual Azure resource type, unless you're talking about the Azure AZ API provider, which does, and we've gone through that. And that's why I say this resource block looks almost exactly like the Azure AZ API resource. Almost exactly like, except like less Terraform. And I'm guessing these params are just input variables. And then we have some kind of system functions like resource group, like we have in ARM, that I guess are a little bit less verbose and easier to use. And then we have some meta language to kind of add some constraints around input variables, much like we have in Terraform, except these are decorators as opposed to attributes of a variable block. So that's a little bit different, a little bit funky for these old Terraform eyes. Yeah, data types, I wouldn't expect there to be a lot of differences. You know, we got variables. So variables appear to be local, like as the equivalent of Terraform locals. And I would imagine Bicep has some of the same syntactical sugar things that Terraform has, HCL has. I mean, this looks right out of the playbook of HCL. I mean, we got depends on, we have modules, we have outputs, we have a for, we have way to do conditions. Scope. This is the scope is radically different, because with Terraform I can provision management groups. You know, I can provision blueprints. I can provision anything at any level of Azure. I do not need to specify a scope to Terraform. That's it. The resource knows what scope it needs to be deployed in, and Terraform just takes care of it. So this scope appears to be, you know, embedded with the way that you deploy these Bicep templates. Another thing, just looking at the command line interface here, it appears that when you execute Bicep, you pass it like a file, an entry point file, like a Bicep file. I don't know if that means that Bicep completely diverges from Terraform, where Terraform operates on a working directory and Bicep like only works on a Bicep file. I don't know if maybe there's ways within one Bicep file to reference other Bicep files, but I'm not a huge fan of that. I do like the kind of uniformity of the folder-based module structure of Terraform. I'm not quite sure how this entry point file thing is gonna pan out. And this whole concept of deploying to a particular scope just, you know, reeks of ARM. It's very, very, very much an ARM concept. So it looks like you can deploy Bicep to targeting a sub. I would imagine if you're going to do a resource group, you're probably going to do that. This looks like you can deploy to a management group. And it even tells you what resources you can deploy at this level. And like policy assignments, role assignments. These are all things that I can provision in Azure at this level, at the management group level with Terraform, and I don't have to ever set a scope. It's really just input to the resource, like the policy set definition or the policy assignment or the blueprint. You know, that's contextualized within the resource. What do we got here? Role assignments, management groups, billing profiles. Yeah, I mean, I've never actually used like billing profile configuration in Terraform. I don't even know if it exists. Maybe there's not a resource for that. I'd have to look into it. But policies for sure. You know, applying policies at the tenant level, it seems like that would be reasonable. I think I've only done policies at the management group level, so I'd have to look into that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if I've actually ever done a tenant level deployment in Terraform, but yeah. So yeah, very, very interesting. It does look like when you actually deploy a Bicep template, you're doing it very much the same way that you do with an ARM template. You do AZ deployment, and instead of passing in a JSON file, you pass in a Bicep file. And if you're doing it at the group level, you may even pass in the resource group name. That's something that I've gotten really used to using Terraform with Azure with is I like how I can provision my resource group with all the resources, and I like how it's all in one folder. And I can create more than one resource group in a deployment if I want to. I don't have to create some separate template. So this kind of concerns me because that was a really nice simplicity feature that Terraform had on Azure over ARM templates. So it does not appear that is going to work. I could be wrong. It could be wrong. But yeah. I think there also is a way to take a Bicep file and to convert that Bicep file into ARM. But I'm not really seeing that here. But yeah, so that's kind of my initial reactions. It seems like the big differences are some subtle naming, like concept names are different. It appears that locals are variables. It appears that input variables are parameters. And it appears that rather than operating off of a working directory, you're operating off of a Bicep file as an entry point file. I'm not sure if you can branch out into additional Bicep files from there. Time will tell. It did appear that was the case, but only using a module reference, which is different from Terraform, because with Terraform, you don't give even a module. You don't give it a file entry point. You give it a working directory entry point. So it does seem like there is this focus on the Bicep file as opposed to the Bicep directory, which leads me to believe that this is going to be very much like ARM, using, instead of a JSON file, using a Bicep file, and instead of using JSON formatted, document, you're going to be using HCL-esque, quasi-HCL code that looks and feels like HCL, but is like slightly different in a Microsoft way. So I'm not sure how I feel about that as somebody who uses Terraform on the regular. So just besides the fact that Bicep can only do Azure, besides the fact that it can only do ARM, I'm already seeing some things that will make things very, very different when coding on Bicep. So anyways, let's go look at my code base, and I did create a little Bicep project where we can provision an OpenAI service from. And I'd like to just walk you through kind of some of these concepts and how that code manifests itself. So let's go check it out. So here is my Bicep code. I have a main.bicep, and I have this target scope set to subscription. I've declared an input parameter for the location, which I am using as an input to my resource group. I am also taking in a prefix, which is a variable, i.e. a local, and I'm using this function unique string to generate a unique string from the subscription ID. This is the quickest and dirtiest way I could do it with my limited Bicep experience, but it seems to do pretty much like what the random string resource does from the random provider, but with less control. That could be, I did not spend a whole lot of time looking into this unique string function to see all the bells and whistles with it, but I pretty much got, what I was looking for here. Now, in order to provision a resource in this resource group, I actually have to reference a module. And I have created a new cognitive.bicep file, and I'm referencing that. I honestly don't even know what this name is for. I don't know if this is for the ARM deployment that happens or what, but it's basically a junk value to me. So I just threw in OpenAI in there just for giggles. I don't think I use it in the future. However, this param for location and name, I believe I do use, which is why I'm passing in this prefix. So I want to take the random string. I want to use the random string inside of my Azure OpenAI cognitive service so that I can control how it gets provisioned. And I'm passing in the scope, which is my RG. And so that's one, I'd say maybe plus of Bicep, is in Terraform we have these very long-winded prefixes where we have to use var dot blah blah blah, we have to use resource type dot blah blah blah, or module dot or locals dot. It seems like the syntax for accessing local variables, input variables, other resources declared within scope, that seems to be much simpler. I have to admit, it's very clean. I like that. The rules for that, I can't claim that I fully understand all the rules. Like, what would cause a conflict? If something's named RG. It's. I guess you'd have to keep all object references unique in that case. Whereas in Terraform, a common practice that I use is I guarantee uniqueness within the scope of a resource type, right? And that allows me to kind of loosely couple related resources together from a naming convention standpoint just by the object reference name that I give them. Because I'm using the resource type as the prefix, I know what instance of that resource type is, related to just by using the object reference name common amongst all those different resource types. So here you can see I'm jumping into a new file, and this is what kind of makes me think Bicep does not work the same way as Terraform. We are not, on the same farm or even the same ballpark. We're not using a working directory because we're jumping into another file, and this is an entry point into that file. So if I go look at cognitive.bicep, you can see my target scope is resource, and you can see that my location I'm grabbing from resource group.location. Now, what's weird is I thought that because I set the value of this parameter, I wouldn't have to pass it in, but I actually got errors when I tried to omit this location parameter. So this seems a little bit redundant. I'm, again, very new to Bicep. I'm not sure why this is needed, but I can assure you it is needed. Otherwise you'll get errors. I got errors. I was able to successfully provision an OpenAI service using this until I hit my quota for the day or whatever. Some of them must be soft deleted or something because I can't provision this anymore. So unfortunately you won't be able to get to see a demo of this. But I am required to pass in this location. So I'm passing in the resource group location, but then I'm also I believe this resource group function is accessing the current scope, which I set previously, right? And the location of the resource group that this resource is scoped within. So I'm not sure why I have to both pass in the scope and then pass in the location that I obtained from the scope later. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So that seems like overly verbose. Of course, I could be doing it wrong, so full disclosure. Now here I'm declaring a local. I don't have to declare a locals block, which does feel more natural to me. It probably feel even more natural having a semicolon at the end here because my background's in Java and C#. But yeah, I mean this seems a little less verbose. You don't have to have locals blocks decorated everywhere, but I think there's pros and cons of that. And then here, really, I'm just setting up this resource. I give it the Azure resource type. This is actually the service. What is the term? Namespace, and then there's a sub namespace which is accounts within cognitive services, and then we have the API version. And then here I give it a name, which this is actually the name that shows up in the portal. Hence, I need to pass in this name parameter or input variable is actually my random string. So I'm going to generate cog OpenAI random string. I pass that in to the name. I pass in the location that I get from the resource group. I set all these things the same way that I did before. I even pass in the OpenAI resource name as the custom subdomain, because that's what we did in ARM, that's what we did in Terraform, AZ API. So I just thought I might as well just do it all the same. And that's it. And so the way I ran this is I set my account, and then I did a deploy. Again, I don't know why I have to pass in the location, but I did. So I had to pass in the location, even though I'm setting the location like in the file. It seems kind of silly. Maybe if I drop this as a param and I just set it as a variable, I could get away with it, or I could just hard code it. But that did seem a little funky, that you always have to pass in the location, it seems. And then I pass in the entry point, main.bicep. And this executes, and this deployed my my OpenAI service. So yeah, so that was my little adventure into Bicep. Overall, it feels, the code, the Bicep code itself feels very much like Terraform. There's a lot of the same like names for things, with very small, subtle, nuanced differences between certain elements. The scoping's different. The working directory thing, I think those are probably the biggest like weirdness of moving from Terraform to Bicep. By the way, I'm not moving. This has not convinced me. This experience has not convinced me to abandon Terraform. Just full disclosure. In fact, it's probably convinced me that, I think I like Terraform better. That's just me. Especially with the power of the Azure AZ API, I can do stuff like this. I can do stuff like this, where if the resource isn't supported, I can provision that thing. I have to dynamic up the input parameters, but I can get that thing deployed. So that feels good. Yeah, probably the weirdest thing is this whole concept of the scope and deploying to a subscription or deploying to a resource group. This is absolutely foreign for somebody who uses the Azure RM provider on a regular basis, and that's probably the biggest structural hurdle that I had to overcome in like figuring out the differences between Bicep and Terraform and working on Azure. So I think in the next video I'll do a comparison of ARM and Bicep and Azure RM on Terraform and the Azure AZ API on Terraform, and we'll really dig in and look at the differences between them side by side. But this, I just kind of tried to get myself smart on Bicep, so to kind of prep myself for that. And I hope this helped. I hope you found this interesting. If you're new to Azure, you're new to Terraform, you're new to Bicep, this gives you some insights, I think, of somebody just like my visceral reaction as a Terraform user to what I'm seeing in terms of the design and usage and mechanics of working with Bicep. And so I hope you found that useful. If you did, please smash that like button and make sure to subscribe to my channel. And until next time, this is the Azure Terraformer signing off.